The summer of '72 did change so much. It was the beginning of modern rock and roll. A friend of mine once said that '72 was actually the beginning of the new millennium. And now I look back, I go, yeah, it probably was. Without rock and roll, I would not have been a photographer. People have often asked me what inspired me, and the truth is the unique charisma of a lot of my early subjects. The thing that I enjoyed about photography, you've got to understand I had a very heavy classical English education, and I got a scholarship to Cambridge. You think, well, a scholarship to Cambridge. But of course there I picked up a camera and the whole lunacy began. Lou Reed, my dear friend for 40 years who died recently. This was one of my Grammy nominations, and this was the cover for an album called Coney Island Baby that came out in '76. And then, of course, the Terrible Trio, as I dubbed them at the time, and that has become, you know, one of the most famous rock and roll party shots of all time. And Sid, this was the beginning. I learned a lot from this shoot. You can see it's a 28mm lens, and it was the first time I'd used it. I didn't look at a lot of photographs. I was only really ever interested in my pictures. I learned all I needed to know about photography as I went along. And then from the Sid Barrett pictures, I mean, technically they're all over the place. Technique was, well, I mean, you had to be able to register a picture on film, but beyond that, technique was not so important. What was important was getting the damned image and getting the energy. Yeah, this used to be CBGBs. What, CBGBs? You mean people don't know that this was like a house of sin for punks? Or really, punk in New York, it grew up here. Lou and Iggy kind of invented punk rock between them. So I did do a lot of live shooting in CBGB. You know, there was a certain intimacy about it. You could stand right up against the stage. It was part of my love affair with New York, you know, that grew and grew and grew till it got completely out of order. Stadiums is performance stuff, and there you're like a big game hunter. I'd rather shoot inside, something a bit more atmospheric. All that early backstage stuff, I was totally there by invitation. It was David, Lou, Iggy, Queen. I mean, Lou said Mick was so familiar, like he was another guitar player. And that's how it felt in those early days. I was part of it. So it is a little bit like coming home to be holding this. And it's a one-hander, you know. I don't like having the thing round my neck so that I look like another tourist, and I never did. I wrap it round my wrists and you know, maybe I feel like a guitar player. Tons of that early stuff of mine was shot on the Nikon Mac. This camera was my companion in those very early years. But the beauty of the DF is it's perfectly suited to my approach to shooting, because it's so flexible and adjustable, and I'm always moving around. It's physically beautiful, and it does have some resonance with my weapon from the old days, but also technologically, the focusing system, the speed at which I can shoot. The fact that I can use some of my old lenses does take me back a bit.
Recreating Debbie Harry, I mean, that's a tough one. You know, I'm like trying to just find myself, but still kind of like pull or draw from her appeal, you know, which was just like very bold and very sexy and just confident, you know, try to pull that out of myself too.
We've been feeding off the old images to produce something that is clearly a reflection, but lives in its own right in the present, you know. To familiarise, to get comfortable, to have some fun, to get off. I had been shooting her for several hours before we got to this one, and then I wanted to change gear. And she got there today. Full praise to her. Debbie is kind of an icon. She's obviously bigger than rock and roll. Some people think I took the best pictures ever taken of her because they're the most Marilyn Monroe. But it doesn't matter if you like the punkier end of the whole thing, because she could do glam punk. She could do the spectrum. I've never seen a bad picture of her.
As Mick has been shooting, I've been shooting with the camera as well, sort of behind the scenes. Digital photography, it's become too much. There's too many buttons, there's too many things, you know. With this DF, you can just go back to the old school way of shooting. And if you just want to cut it to stop, or if you know manual cameras, it's the best way to just sort of jump in. And he's only inspiring, you know, to learn that someone who shot the most iconic images on an old Niagara or Nikon, that if he did it 30 years, you know, 20 years before I even started shooting, that I could do it as well.
Do I know when I've got the shot? I know when I've got the shot. Do I know the exact frame? Sometimes I'm moving too fast to be dead sure. But I know what it smells like when you've nailed the. For me, it's completely non-cerebral. When people talk about style, I don't know that I don't think. I think, you know, I can go from punk to pretty in 10 minutes, you know. I feel out the situation. I don't go in imposing. I don't have rigid ideas, for the most part, about what I'm going to shoot. I just get a general feel. Summer's a bit loud and raucous, sometimes it's rather more gentle and caressing. You have to do what is appropriate unto the subject, because all that matters is you get the picture.